Coach Sully, Reps and Sweat Martial Arts and Fitness. This is Mat Chat. So today, folks, I want to ask the age-old question, does size matter? So the short answer is, it absolutely matters. Of course it matters. But there are also other factors that come into play. So with martial arts, since we've been introduced, at least in the West, but I think it's probably a tradition that's been around since the beginning of time, that we romanticize about the underdog, the weaker, the smaller. We romanticize about that person overcoming, especially in a confrontation situation. We romanticize about the little person winning. You know, came up with figures like Bruce Lee, like Jackie Chan, and these guys weren't these physically imposing figures, but yet they were able to take out anybody regardless of the size. So with that, because we are rooting, all of us are rooting for the underdog. I think it's just a natural thing. We are easily convinced that size isn't that much of a factor, but it is. You know, in the Hollywood movies, you know, you'll have a Angelina Jolie giving some big 250-pound muscle dude some serious work. The picture is even painted that the small person is able to take out multiple bigger people and make it look relatively easy. But in reality, a bigger person has significant advantages when you're talking about confrontation, when you're talking about physically imposing. It's a physical thing. So a person's size will play a huge part in the outcome. But here's the thing. Size does matter. Size is a huge factor, but it is not the only factor. And that's where it's not a lost cause for the smaller person. So the way that I usually look at, or the way that I explain it, is I explain it by, again, first of all, recognizing that size is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And then examining and looking at what the other factors are. And when you look at it that way, you can kind of make a scale out of it. And then you give, size a certain amount of weight. You give technique a certain amount of weight. You give conditioning a certain amount of weight. You give age a certain amount of weight. You give circumstances and environment a certain amount of weight. So all of these things are factors. But to answer the question, size does matter. It's just not the only thing that matters. But there are ways to even the odds. We were, for the last couple of weeks, I've been talking a lot about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And how that can be, I believe that it's probably, if you're only going to do one and you're looking for something for self-defense and you only have time to train one thing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think, goes further than anything else. And so, especially for women, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a total game changer for women. But does that mean that the 130, 120 pound woman can get the best of a 250 pound man? Nope. But it doesn't mean they absolutely couldn't, because we only know one factor. We know that the woman knows Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we know a few factors, and we know that she weighs 130 pounds, and we know that the guy weighs 250 pounds. So then we have to ask questions. Does the guy know Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Does the guy know any kind of wrestling? How good a shape is that guy in? How good a shape is she in? And then we can start adding, and see which side comes up with the most. And that'll determine who would win that exchange. But the size is a huge factor. And I always tell people, if size didn't matter, why do they have weight classes in combat sports? Why do they have a men's and women's division in combat sports? These things play factors, and they are the size factor is such a huge factor that it can't just be overlooked. But can it be overcome? Of course it can be. But you gotta weigh the factors. But in a situation, in a self-defense situation, and we'll bring it and make it a little bit more specific for women in a self-defense situation. Why is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu going to be beneficial to you for self-defense? If you're saying that size matters, does it even matter if I learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Will I be able to fight off a 250 pound man? Is it worth it? And the answer to that question, I think it is worth it. I think that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it is not the end all be all, but you get more bang for your buck. And then in a self-defense situation, the goal is to escape. We might not be able to put you in a ring and you, after 5 grueling rounds, end the fight with your hands up, but we could probably get you out of there. We could probably get you to safety. And I think that's the most important part when we're talking about self-defense. But size absolutely matters. Have I seen some smaller practitioners I mean, we could talk about jujitsu. There was a time, I don't weigh that much now, I weigh around 210 now, but there's a time when I weighed about 250 pounds. And I've been worked by somebody who weighed 140 pounds. I've gotten some solid work from maybe 130, 140 pound woman before. So the possibility is definitely there. I would say that the times where I've been dominated by somebody that's significantly smaller than me are few and far between, but the people that have been able to do that, that are skilled enough to do it, are significantly more skilled, or were significantly more skilled than I was. And there are some people out there still at 130, 140 pounds that can take out even people at a higher level. So there are people who have elevated their skill set high enough to overcome size disadvantage. But that's a really, really high level of skill. But again, it goes back to what we were talking about, how it's an aspect. It's a factor. You put it on. So if I'm coming with 20 pounds to put on the side of skill set, I can overcome somebody with a smaller skill set level at a lower weight, at a significantly lower weight. So, to answer the question, size does matter, but it depends. It depends. It's a factor, and it's not it's a factor, but it's not the only factor. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that was helpful for that conversation. Hopefully folks are able to elevate their skill level to overcome a size disadvantage if they find themselves in a situation where they need to lean on their skill set in order to survive. So keep that in mind. All right, gotta run. Coach Sully, Reps and Sweat Martial Arts and Fitness. This was Matt Chat.